So I have been playing Shantae and the Pirate's Curse on the 3DS. And this game came out in 2014, but I believe it actually came out on other systems this year in 2016. It's a Metroidvania. The pacing feels a lot more like Zelda than Metroid, I'd say, because essentially it's a case of visit a new island, you find out the issue with the new island, you meet the people, etc. You eventually get to a dungeon, you get an item in the dungeon, and then you beat the dungeon and the boss in the dungeon with that new item. And then you sort of rinse and repeat about 5, 6 times.
Now, I don't know if this structure is similar to other Shantae games, because this is a series that has gone back to, like, the Game Boy, right? Like, GBC days, Shantae games have been
back
around.
to the mid-90s. And the funny thing is that Way Forward made a handful of franchise tie-ins way back when, including your famous Sabrina game that you enjoyed on the good old Game Boy Color MBZ.
Right, you mentioned to me, like, hey, remember that Sabrina game on GBC that, like, was based on the cartoon and had this weird stuff in it? That was made by Way Forward. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And they've been around for a much longer time than I think a lot of people think they have. Like, they've come, I feel, to more prominence during the 3DS era with a lot of these digital games, but they have been around for a very long time, and obviously I've played games without knowing that they were made by them, so there we go. Also, Way Forward created, some people from there left and made Yacht Club, which of course we love for Shovel Knight, so a lot of good things coming out of Way Forward, so yeah.
Talking of Yacht Club games and Shovel Knight, I believe you mentioned this when you played the game MBZ, but Jake Kaufman, who did the soundtrack to Shovel Knight, also does the soundtrack to this game, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. It's so good. I love it.
That is one of the high points of this game, is the soundtrack. It's really, really, like, it's pumping. Like, there's some real pumping tunes in this.
As soon as you get into that first level and you're just running across, and you're like, man, this is some good stuff going on here.
Like the bass kicks in the main theme tune on sort of the hub island that is such a good tune. Mechanically, the game is incredibly solid. However, it's stuff like the hitboxes, that they're just incredibly precise. So your main attack is your hair whip that Shantae has. It's incredibly precise, and it makes the game considerably tougher. And in general, it feels like it's sort of a game designed for gamers. Like it's almost implied that you've played something like a Zelda or a Metroid or something of that ilk before coming into this game.
Like Willow Smith, you whip your hair back and forth.
You do indeed whip your hair back and forth. That's like your almost only attack other than like a gun you have. So there's a whole lot of hair whipping. So this is like a big thing of this game that they keep coming back to. It's just the amount of just anime girls and like just a whole lot of skin showing, and it's just a bit over the top in my opinion. Like every female, there's one point where every single female character in the game is captured by this group of it's like a tribe, and they all think that female, that woman, is their princess, and they all end up in these slave Leia-esque bikinis, and it literally goes around every single woman in the game. It's just so over the top. And there's like another part where like there are these girls getting ready for, they're like camping, and then they get into their bikinis, and then the sun reflects off their very pale skin, and it creates, like, reflects and creates a fire at their campfire. Like, there's just really unnecessary, over the top, just sort of pointless objectification, I should say. It's just a bit over the top for my liking, and I don't really see its place here. I don't know what you think.
I really wasn't too bothered by it, because I think they know what they're doing, and they're not being stupid about, like, I think the way that when Kojima talked about Quiet in Metal Gear Solid 5 and how, there's a real reason for why she's like this and why we're objectifying her like this and why she can't, wear clothes, is like, oh yeah, because she can breathe through her skin. And it's like, that's just ridiculous, because you're trying to justify something that clearly isn't the case. I would be more respectful of Kojima if he just flat out went, yeah, I just like to see that shit, so I put it in my game because I just like seeing women like that.
I would argue this is getting on that, though. It's not. There's no need for it.
I guess, but at least they are kind of just doing it in a sense that they're very much aware of what they're doing, and they're not really making any excuses for it, is what I'm saying. Like I'm not necessarily saying it's a great thing, but I'm saying they aren't trying to justify it as something it isn't. They're being blatant about what it is, and they're not apologizing for it, which you can take that how you will.
Yeah.
But the way that Kojima does it, and he tries to justify it, is just completely dishonest.
Okay, no,
That's
I do see that distinction.
Yeah.
Either way, and it's a whole other conversation we get into. There's just
Plus, you got the
too
3D
much.
there, which does
Exactly.
You know,
it's just over the top. It's so pointless, and in this style of game, I'd personally like to see less of it. I think it's a bit over the top. Personally, that's my view. I'm sure we can have a whole debate on that again at some point in the future.
And of course, I think WayForward's fan base and how they see Shantae and the way that Shantae is obviously portrayed through their media and everything, I think they know that that's an aspect that their fan base likes for whatever reason.
Good for them.
Yeah, I guess.
There's also quite a bit of obscure backtracking in this game. It's probably
my least favorite thing.
It's the weakest aspect of this game, I'd say. There's numerous times you have to go back to old islands and visit obscure people and places to access things, and there's a lot of rigmarole and
there's a lot of, hey, you need to get to this certain area, and we're not going to tell you how to do that or what item you need, but go around and talk to people in the world, and maybe you'll find someone who needs something else, which will then lead to you getting that other thing, which then it's like these chains of quests of getting items for different people that will eventually result in you going in the right place that you need to go. But I don't think it's made clear enough for the player, and thus it creates a lot of wandering around and talking to people, which is not fun, and I don't think is a good part of this game. So it just slows down the experience and makes it just sluggish.
Yeah, I went to a guide quite a few times on aspects where I knew that I'd have to backtrack, and it's always the same point. And this, you can almost say this about traditional Zelda games as well. It's that I explained it. It's the sequence of you visit a new place, you meet its people. It's always in that phase before the dungeon, but while you're in this new place and meeting people, where one of them will have this problem that grants you access to the dungeon, and then it's some sort of problem that they need an item for, and then that item is usually somewhere else. It's very tropey. It's repeated a lot in this game, and it's a pain. It's the weakest part. I think that the rest of the game is incredibly solid. I think that it's a cool game in terms of difficulty, because I think if you want to play this game without all the money you can invest in your upgrades that boost your health and your ability to whip your hair back and forth and your ability to upgrade some of the weapons you get, all of that stuff is very optional. So you can choose to upgrade less, buy less boosting potions. So you have a potion that boosts the speed at which you can whip your, not the speed, sorry, the power with which you can whip your hair back.
The amount of damage you do with each hit, basically.
Exactly. And there's other stuff you can buy, like potions that do the equivalent of fairies. So they regen you when you run out of health. So you can choose to not buy these things or buy them. I invested pretty heavily in these things, and in general it's quite a tough game. I think I did use a lot of those boosting potions and things like that on the bosses, because a lot of these bosses are actually quite tough.
Well, I wouldn't say they were tough. I just say they're damage sponges, and that's the thing where
they are sponges.
I don't see how this would be an enjoyable game to play without getting all that boosting stuff, because it just becomes the tedium of doing that much damage and trying to survive, you know? Like, I just don't see why someone would do that.
But, I mean, that is a better example of proving your skill, to be able to do that longer than someone who
maybe
can't.
I don't know. I'd say like there are other games and examples of where you can use skill in different ways.
Definitely, but I think in a very simplistic,
them.
raw, let's save inputting any more mechanics into this game, kind of, it's lazy game design. I'm not defending it, but I'm saying it's a very simplistic way of making a game harder. It's just damage sponges are just a typical
give them
mechanic.
A big old HP bar.
Give them exactly, and these weapons that boost your power just make that easier. So I think overall, I think this is a really great game. it takes everything I love about Zelda and Metroid and does put it together. I did get a genuine sensation when I'd reached like a new island that had new people, new characters, new places to explore. Some of the level design in terms of the art can get a bit weak at points. A lot of
Do you mean in terms
platforms.
of like background and foreground stuff?
I mean, like in terms of you can see a platform that is just painted in a certain way to match the theming of the island you're on, and you can
Right.
tell that it was a platform originally, and then they just whapped on some theming. If that makes sense. It's
Okay.
not. It doesn't feel like the theming is intertwined with the level design too
Right,
much.
it's more like this platform is now ancient Egypt or whatever, as opposed to
Exactly.
being a crumbling ruin or something like that.
Yeah, and that's fine because I think mechanically the game does make up for it. It's a really solid game. It's a nice lengthy game. It feels like a meaty experience, and at the same time doesn't overstay its welcome. It's got a very challenging section of platforming before the final boss.
I was going to bring that up because I think that's a really good point at which it utilizes all the upgrades you have
Yes.
in terms of the speed boosting and the using your is it like a cloth that helps you float through the air and stuff like
It's
that?
your pirate's hat.
Yes, of course.
It's
So
effectively
lots of
like a deku leaf, yeah.
right. So chaining together of abilities to get across platforming challenges definitely one of the better aspects of the game for sure.
Definitely. Overall, really enjoyed it. I'd be well up for playing another Shantae game. I appreciate a lot of people saying that this is perhaps the best one, so that might make older ones a bit difficult to go back to, but I'm interested. One final point. There's a cool little Easter egg I looked at when I was looking at some guide online for some point, and there's a Game Boy Color level you can access in this game.
What?
Yep. So if you go back to, I believe it's the second island, there's some inside the dungeon. There's like a wall you can charge through, and it gives you access to one of the Game Boy Color levels.
Is this like an
and
emulator within the game, or is it do they change the art style?
so your Shantae's art style doesn't change, but the level's art style does change.
Oh, okay,
which
I
is
see.
quite cool.
Yeah, that is neat.
You don't even reach a boss or anything. It's a bit simplistic, but it's cool. It's like a little thing I just sort of found online at the end and tried out myself. So yeah,
Oh.
Shantae, really enjoyed it. Looking forward to some more.
If you enjoyed this discussion and would like to hear more, consider subscribing to us on YouTube and following the podcast playlist. You can also find us on iTunes and various other places. Follow us on Twitter at TNL Podcast and email us thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.